Welcome to the Dynasty One podcast. I'm your host, Carl Safchik. Tonight, I am rolling solo. Jesse Patterson was supposed to join me, and one of his family members got into a minor fender bender. I've been assured everybody's okay. It was kind of a last-minute thing, so I'm going to keep going on with the show. We got a little bit of news and notes. After that, I'll be joined by John Proctor of the DFS Power Hour, a podcast I listen to all the time. I used to binge that podcast. Last year, they had a show focusing on preseason DFS, which you would think, well, that doesn't have a whole lot to do with Dynasty, but it does because they are concentrating on the players that we care about, right? The guys that might be up and coming, the diamonds in the rough. So we're going to try to find the diamonds in the rough this year, the players that aren't being talked about, maybe a little bit under the radar. Before we do, it was kind of a busy news day, at least relative to what we've been experiencing before. I'll go through the big three news stories before we bring John on. Before I go through those news stories, I want to thank everybody who's been rating, reviewing, and subscribing to the podcast. It's very, very important to us. If you just subscribe, just click subscribe. If you're on iTunes, if you're on Stitcher, whatever device you use to download the podcast, we really appreciate that. And we really appreciate if you leave us a review. That really helps us to climb the charts, and those little things are what keep the podcast going. But let's talk about some of the news going on in the NFL world today. The Redskins and Kirk Cousins failed to reach a long-term agreement. We kind of saw this coming. What we didn't see coming is the organization put out a press release basically blaming Kirk Cousins. It's something that you've grown to expect from this Redskins organization. They throw the guy under the bus rather than just, sit back, take a little bit of the blame. They just can't help themselves. And it might have been both sides might have been at fault a little bit. But as far as dynasty impacts, for one, I think we kind of all expected this to happen. So we don't know where Kirk Cousins is going to end up in 2018, maybe with Kyle Shanahan, maybe in LA with his other former offensive coordinator and Sean McVay with the Rams. And maybe he stays with maybe he stays with the Redskins. These are all possibilities. I personally think that whatever happens, I think he's a good quarterback in his own right. I don't think he's a product of the system. If I were a Kirk Cousins owner, and I am in one league, I would probably prefer that he stay with the Redskins. I like Jamison Crowder. Jordan Reed is maybe the best receiving threat at the tight end position in the league between he and Rob Gronkowski. Maybe you could throw Travis Kelce in there. They have obviously invested in the passing game with drafting Josh Doxson. Jamison Crowder's been a pleasant surprise. Terrell Pryor, I think, is just going to work really well with Kirk Cousins, even though he's only on a one-year deal. I think it's a possibility that if he and Kirk Cousins succeed together, maybe they sign both of them. So it's kind of discouraging that he didn't sign, but it is something that we saw coming. It is extra discouraging that the team had to go and put out a hit piece on Kirk Cousins. So this type of stuff could influence whether or not he wants to return to the team in 2018 if they're going to try to throw him under the bus in the media, which they've done in the past with other quarterbacks, other players, GMs, coaches. They're kind of one of those it's never our fault regimes, something that we've seen a lot of lately, not just in sports. But we'll move on from Cousins. Obviously, it's not a huge deal if you're in one quarterback league. Cousins isn't going to make or break you, and it isn't like he's retiring or anything. It's just the fact that he may not be with the Redskins beyond 2017. The other big news in franchise tag, or in this case, in both cases, not getting a franchise tag, is Le'Veon Bell. He and the Steelers reportedly worked tirelessly to try to get a deal done. They did not. I'm a big fan of Le'Veon Bell. I don't think anybody doesn't like his game. He's one of the best running backs in the league. He was, I believe, even though he missed 4 games last year, he was still the RB3, right behind Ezekiel Elliott, who played 4 more games than him. And he would have been the RB2 if we're counting just points per game, and it's not particularly close. So it would be David Johnson who really ran away with it. And then I think Ezekiel Elliott is definitely the second best fantasy running back. And we'll get into Ezekiel Elliott here in a minute too. Le'Veon Bell, 3 years ago was the RB1. 2 years ago, missed some games. If you prorate his short season, he would have been the RB2. Obviously, prorating gets you into a lot of trouble, but I think it's safe to say with a player with Le'Veon Bell's talent that, it's safe to do that. And last year would have been the RB2 if you prorate, but really don't have to do much prorating. He was right behind Ezekiel Elliott with 4 less games. I think he is somewhat dependent on the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. A lot of his game relies on patience. Ezekiel Elliott, I think, just hits the hole really fast. Le'Veon Bell is one of the most patient runners I've ever seen in my football watching life. He really waits for those holes to open up. He's playing chess out there. If he were to go to a team with a lesser offensive line, and I'm not saying that he wouldn't be able to put up great numbers. I think that he needs a good offensive line because he relies on that patience. And he's not slow to react. That's not what I'm saying. He's very quick to react when he sees the hole, but he lets the hole develop in front of him. I would have liked to have seen him sign a long-term deal with Pittsburgh. Obviously, it's tough in the landscape of the NFL nowadays where running backs are being devalued. NFL teams are correctly realizing that stud running backs don't win you games. They never really have, but the NFL, who is an organization, who is you could say probably most organizations. I guess Belichick has probably realized this in the past, but most organizations in the NFL are slow to realize what players are impact players and what players aren't impact players. We're seeing it now where the corners and the pass rushers and the left tackles, the right tackles, the quarterbacks, obviously, they are getting the big time contracts. Running backs just don't impact the game in the way that some of those players do. But in fantasy football, they obviously do. In fantasy football, they matter. So I would have liked to have seen Le'Veon Bell sign a long-term deal. And that's probably where the reason I'm going to put him as my RB3 in Dynasty. Ezekiel Elliott took a little bit of a hit today. I think with the age and just the youth and the offensive line and all that, I think I'm comfortable putting Ezekiel Elliott 1 and David Johnson just being 4 years older, I think, and having that knee injury last year, I think that 4 years old. Well, at least I'm just looking at just age. So David Johnson's 25, Ezekiel Elliott's 21. So it might not be a full 4 years, but there is a over 3 year difference between those two. So I would put Ezekiel Elliott 1, although I'll go into some reasons why I'm not buying him right now either. And then David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell would be like 1A and 1B essentially. I did a top 10 dynasty assets ranking last night. I had 7 wide receivers in my top 7, and then I had the 3 running backs, and it kind of landed that way out of coincidence. I definitely do value them that way, but my 8th wide receiver would go after Le'Veon Bell. That's how closely I look at all 3 of those running backs. And really, if you want to toss them in a hat and come up with your own ranking, that's fine with me. So on to Ezekiel Elliott specifically. He, according to a TMZ report, I don't like quoting TMZ, but I mean, it's fantasy relevant because of Roger Goodell and his stiff punishments, and maybe they should be. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't be, but he is a tough customer when it comes to handing out suspensions. Ezekiel Elliott not only was already under investigation for domestic abuse, but also he just recently was reportedly punched a guy in a Dallas bar or nightclub. So apparently the police are looking into it. I don't know all the details, but I do know that there are rumblings of a suspension coming. Now, if we're talking about Dynasty, a 1, 2, even 3 game suspension isn't a huge deal. I'm not going to knock him down my ranking for a 1, 2, or 3 game suspension. What I am going to do is I'm going to be very concerned that after 2 possible incidents, that he is on Rogers Goodell's hit list. Nobody is exempt from this. We saw the Golden Boy Tom Brady get completely attacked by the NFL. Some of it probably warranted on the Brady account, but went way above and beyond. I think everybody can agree with that. So if they could go after the NFL's poster boy and Tom Brady, Ezekiel Elliott's chopped liver compared to Tom Brady. So this is definitely concerning. This is definitely a reason that I'm not going to put him below David Johnson, partially because of that knee injury. I'm not going to put him below Le'Veon Bell because Le'Veon Bell has his own suspension issues with the smoking weed with LeGarrette Blount. So all 3 of those running backs, outside of just being running backs, which I already harp on not being as valuable as wide receivers, not being as valuable as maybe even tight ends if we were in the heyday of young Gronkowski and young Graham. We're not right now. We have Gronkowski and maybe Reed and maybe Kelsey, but those guys I would rate down further. So just compared to the wide receivers, I'm building my team around Michael Thomas, Amari Cooper, even A.J. Green at his age. I would take over any of those running backs. T.Y. Hilton is where it gets really murky. I would probably take T.Y. Hilton after those 3 running backs, but it's getting close. It's getting to where especially with all 3 of these having concerns outside of just being running backs, the suspension issues with possible suspension issues with Ezekiel Elliott and looming third strike with Le'Veon Bell could be out for maybe a year. I don't have that information in front of me. I don't know what his next strike is, but it could be huge. So we'll keep an eye on what's going on with Ezekiel Elliott. Outside of the fact I wrote a NFC East preview for training camp and preseason. The one thing that I was going with, and I wrote this before the news today, was that the Dallas Cowboys lost 2 big pieces of their offensive line. Our editor, Jacob Henry, who was on the show last week, he tweeted out earlier in the week that the Cowboys offensive line has almost as many questions as answers. And they do have 3 answers. I defined Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, and Travis Frederick as answers. Those guys you can say are cornerstone pieces of a franchise, and they all happen to play on the same unit. But they lost Doug Free. They lost their left guard. His name slips me at the moment. But those were above starting caliber players. And now they are moving La'el Collins to right tackle, which he didn't play well at last year. He profiles as a tackle. He can play an amazing guard. I mean, he is a physical specimen, but it takes some technique, and he just didn't show that last year. And I don't know who's going to fill in at the left guard. They got Jonathan Cooper, who was, I believe, on the Patriots last year, originally drafted by the Cardinals. I think he was a top 10 pick, if I remember correctly. He went like 7 or 9 the year that the Cardinals drafted him. So he at least showed talent in college, but hasn't been able to bring it together. I think he suffered some injuries while in Arizona, but hasn't been able to bring it together as like a true NFL talent. And these are major questions with Ezekiel Elliott outside of you're a running back, outside of you may have assaulted a woman, outside of he may have assaulted a man in a Dallas area nightclub. These are big questions for a guy that like could be a consensus top 5 player in Dynasty. I don't buy it. Outside of him just being a running back, outside of the fact that I don't buy running backs, these are major questions. And we have the questions with Le'Veon Bell that I just went over. We have the questions with David Johnson. I'm just more comfortable investing in wide receiver that high. Well, those were the major news and notes. If I have to remind you again, please subscribe. Please go rate our podcast and leave us a review. If you do, send us an email at dynastyOnefantasy@gmail.com, and I'll give you a shout out on the show. I think that's a good exchange. In just a second, I'll be joined by John Proctor. We're going to talk all about what to look for in training camps, what to look for in the preseason. There's a lot of under the radar guys that I've sent him a little bit of a show description of what he can expect. There are some under the radar guys which I think we can probably bring to the light, and you guys might enjoy. So stay tuned.
What's up, dude?
Hey, what's up, man?
Not shit. Oh, man. All right.
I just had a promoted tweet to buy fake gold teeth, fake gold rapper's teeth. Yellow gold hip hop removable mouth grills.
You should buy a set. It's destiny.
3 out of 5 stars.
Well, I mean, you are kind of like, you're near Baltimore, right?
I'm more near DC, but I'm not super far from Baltimore.
Well, you can get a set and take them out of the town DC, man.
Right. All right, we could jump right in if you're ready.
Yeah, man. It's fine with me.
Did you want to promote anything other than Power Hour?
Nope. Other than, I mean, we're doing the preseason stuff. It's kind of what we're doing right now.
On Power Hour?
Yeah. So, well, powerhourpod.com is a new website. So all the preseason stuff's gonna be behind a paywall this year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just wrapped up a bunch of preseason stuff too, so that's why I figured it'd be perfect to talk about that since we had an article coming out, and then since you guys are stepping up your preseason stuff.
Yeah, man. I'm always down to talk camp.
All right, now we are joined by a fellow Marylander, John Proctor, at John Proctor DFS. He does the Power Hour podcast, one that I enjoy listening to. Every now and then they actually do a Power Hour on the podcast. How you doing tonight, John?
Good, man. Good. Now we it'll be weird doing a Power Hour if Scott's not on this year, but the actual Power Hour is a disaster. It's been good, man. It's been fun.
I heard you and TJ and Ryan busting Scott's balls the other day for coming to the defense of Matthew Berry, somebody who needs every little guy to come to his defense.
Oh yeah, Scott was out there white knighting for him, man. He definitely needed it.
Well, you're the perfect guest to have on. We have training camp starting up. Preseason's not too far away. I remember last year I listened to a few of y'all's podcasts talking about preseason, and you're getting into the preseason now. You're doing the what is it, the powerhour.com? What is the website?
Yeah, so it's powerhourpod.com. Last year we did pretty in-depth preseason stuff. I did a lot on Twitter, a lot on the podcast, and we decided to just sort of streamline it, go with an actual website this year, put it together, and the advice was pretty good, so we're going to make people pay for it.
Awesome. So y'all did some really in-depth stuff last year. I know you're going to do it again this year. So let's talk about some not only just preseason battles, obviously stuff that we're going to be looking for in training camp. The first one I wanted to start with, just because there was a video out that he was training hard. He looked pretty buff. A guy that I was pretty surprised didn't play well last year, even had his roster spot threatened. Some people speculated. That's Leonte Carew. I mean, he's a former third-round pick. The team moved up to draft him. The workout video got everybody talking. Carew's somebody that I was high on. Can he crack 3 wide receiver sets? Would that be too much to ask, or am I hoping for too much this year?
I don't think he's going to. I don't know. I mean, they paid Kenny Stills like starter money, right, which surprised me. But I think they really like what they have out of Stills. And Stills was a guy that we all, or at least most people, really liked that offseason when he was a free agent coming away from New Orleans. And everyone was pretty bummed about him going to Miami because, everyone was really excited about Carew, and then Carew couldn't even get on the field. So I think it's going to take an injury. I don't know. Or I mean, it's certainly, I think it's more possible that he passes Parker than he passes Stills if Parker ends up back in the doghouse. I think with Parker, it seems like it's more a personality issue. They think he's lazy or something. So that's a weird group of wide receivers, though.
It really is. Yeah, and it's funny because Adam Gase, I talked with Raymond Summerlin of Roto World about this. He said that he let me into a little inside knowledge of the Roto World crew. They have a little joke going that the whole 2017 Miami Dolphins is going to the Hall of Fame because the way that Adam Gase talks about them in pressers. It's really uncanny how he talks about Landry and Parker and Tannehill and Julius Thomas and just everybody's doing great, you know?
Yeah, and it's a team that like last year, all three, or actually all four wide receivers were like actually drafted in MFL 10s, and then Ryan Tannehill was like someone people weren't taking till like the 13th round. So right. It's like everyone wants all of these guys to like be a thing, but I don't know how much of the pie. I mean, Landry's obviously the number one target. He's going to see the most targets of anyone on the team, and I don't think there's enough to go around for three more.
You could kind of see that happening with Eli Manning this year. Everybody wants OBJ, obviously, for obvious reasons. Brandon Marshall, even Sterling Shepard's being drafted high. Evan Ingram, for whatever reason, people are really into. Well, I know the reasons they're into him. I don't think that they realize the reasons that they shouldn't be into him. But really, nobody's on Eli Manning.
Yeah, and he's in everyone's. Although Marshall's starting to drop in ADP a little bit, I think people are coming off that hype a little bit. I mean, right when they first signed him, everyone was like, "Oh my God, Marshall! He's gonna Beckham's gonna lose all this volume." But Eli's scary every year. It feels like because I feel like the cliff is coming. But even when you're drafting MFL 10s, you're not drafting 100% Eli, so he's definitely a value. It's a better receiving core than they had last year, so it's not like he's going to be worse unless he actually falls off that cliff.
What is the percent chance, and you have to give me a percent more than 0. What is the percent chance that Geno Smith comes off the bench and keeps actually justifies all of those receivers' ADPs?
Geno Smith?
Yeah.
Oh man.
I like Geno Smith.
I didn't realize we were going to talk about Geno Smith.
We're going really deep. I like Geno Smith. I think that there's a better than 0% chance that he is the better Giants quarterback this year.
Oh man. I'm not a big Geno Smith fan. I can't do it, man. Do I think he could support? I think if Smith comes off the bench, I think he can still support Beckham.
I feel like that's one of my favorite lines from any guest on this podcast, and you're totally justified in it by saying, I didn't know we were going to talk about Geno Smith. Like, totally justified answer. Like, you don't have to feel bad that you weren't prepared to talk about Geno Smith.
I mean, is anyone ever prepared? This guy, dude. We're talking about the temper tantrum of the century during the draft. I mean, I'm just not a fan.
I mean, was it that much different than the Aaron Rodgers thing, though?
I guess not. But at least Aaron Rodgers is good. So
right.
We can let it go.
But we didn't find that out until year 4. And this is year 4 for Geno Smith.
Oh my God.
I just really compared Geno Smith to Aaron Rodgers, like in more ways than one.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on then. How about Alvin Kamara? Everybody's talking about the battle between Ingram and Peterson, and rightfully so. I mean, Peterson's one of the all-time greats, and Mark Ingram played really well last year when Sean Payton let him play. But Kamara, who could be the Saints' running back of the future, I feel like he could make a run for playing time. Maybe not substantial playing time, but what are you looking for out of this 3-headed backfield in training camp and in preseason?
It's funny. I actually picked a fight with Scott in a DM about Kamara when I saw the list of topics you had sent to me because I wanted to get fired up for it. Kamara's a guy that I think he's, for dynasty purposes, he's a guy who is definitely interesting. It's always you always want to pay attention to who might become the next great receiving back in New Orleans.
Sure.
But I think the Kamara hype for this year is getting out of hand. I think that people started by saying, "Oh, maybe he could become the next, Reggie Bush, Darren Sproles," and it has turned into he is going to be 2017 Reggie Bush role. He's gonna catch 80 passes, and the last time we did this was CJ Spiller, and that just went right down the tube.
That was weird. That was weird.
Yes, that was
because it almost seemed like predestined that CJ Spiller would fill that role.
Yeah, and then it was weird because he came from a Chan Gailey sort of space back role that we thought was or should have been similar to the role that he was supposed to play in New Orleans, and I don't know if it was just different and he couldn't get it, or I mean, we also see that Sean Payton obviously just randomly hates running backs, so
that's weird.
Certainly possible too. But I think it's more likely that Kamara is the next, Travaris Cadet than he is the next Reggie Bush. I think in general, it's more likely that a running back is less good than we think he is than better than we think he is. So, I mean, there's that obvious ceiling of a Sprolesian role in a New Orleans offense, but they also have only given those roles to guys who are really good. So, Reggie Bush, even though he really fell off, was great as a receiver in New Orleans. Sproles was amazing. Pierre Thomas was pretty good for a few years, but they were legitimately good. And then when you had CJ Spiller, you had Travaris Cadet, it's just, it's a 30-40 catch type of role. And Ingram's there too, and Ingram can catch the ball. So I wouldn't be excited about him in redraft, but I think the role is exciting enough that he's a dynasty target, though I think he's getting pretty expensive in the Dino world.
Yeah, and I don't know if he completely profiles well to the Reggie Bush, Darren Sproles. Maybe more so Darren Sproles, but he's kind of thicker than both of those guys, kind of more muscular than both of those guys, I think. So he profiles as someone who can maybe get a little bit more early down work than those guys did if he were to reach his potential. And I think you brought up a good point. A lot of the times when we talk about rookies or young guys that we do project, best case scenario. I remember a lot of people were saying that Nelson Aguilar coming out of college was already better than Jeremy Maclin. Like he was going to not only fill that role, but be better. I mean, we've seen it with Perriman and DGB and, my love affair with Philip Dorsett. A lot of these guys don't pan out. So I do think best case scenario, I think, probably won't have the fantasy impact that Bush and Sproles did while in New Orleans, but I think he has a little bit of a higher ceiling in that I think he could get a little bit more early down work eventually down the road than those guys did.
Yeah. And I think this year it seems all but guaranteed that Peterson is the goal line back. So, if you're pursuing a guy in redraft whose likelihood of scoring touchdowns is only going to be through the air as a receiver, and he's competing for touches with AP and Ingram, it's just not all that appealing. But I think he's somebody who is going to be a good dynasty target middle of this season when everyone realizes oh shit, actually he's not going to do much this year, and people sort of cut bait.
Yeah, I don't know how often that happens. I mean, Derrick Henry's still really high in ADP, Kenneth Dixon, stuff like that. So there is a sophomore baked in value in Dynasty where even if they don't do much, they could hold a little bit of value. But I agree with you. He could really be on the outside looking at. How excited are you for Mark Ingram to have 47 of 79 yards rushing, going down, they're 47 of the 79 total yards of a drive, and they sub him out for Adrian Peterson, and Adrian Peterson gets a 1-yard touchdown, and they just do that over and over again. How excited are you for Mark Ingram to have a Noshawn Moreno sized tear running down his cheek on the sideline?
I mean, when I was getting Adrian Peterson as a 10th round pick in MFL 10s, those rosters will be happy. But, in like my football heart, it's going to hurt so much because I'm a big Ingram fan, but I can't foresee him being like the dedicated goal line back, and that's really sucks.
I want to be clear, like I don't wish any wrong on any human being or athlete, like just inherently, but like I just can't wait for the turmoil. Like Sean Payton asked for this, I feel like.
Yeah, and what's going to be really tilting though is like if AP comes out and looks really good.
Yeah.
Like because he's in an offense that's actually able to sustain drives and throw down the field, that he's just like, I don't know, imagine him just running into weak boxes and going wild. It's just going to really piss me off.
And he has silenced the doubters before. I remember not wanting to touch him. I think he like lasted to the 5th round of one of my redrafts in 2012, was it, that he was coming back off of the 2011 ACL injury. So he's shown that he could come back before. Let's move on. I want to talk about the Baltimore Ravens, and it seems like this is every year to where it's tough to not only predict which tight end will be the guy to own, but also which wide receivers would be the guys to own and which running backs would be the guys to own. I want to at least start with the tight ends here. Max Williams doesn't have a timetable to return, but Crockett Gilmore should be healthy by camp. Ben Watson is healthy, and there's been rumblings of bringing in Gary Barnidge. Is there anybody that could separate themselves from the group and for the Ravens at the tight end position?
I feel like if someone is going to separate, it's going to be Watson. Mm-hmm. But I have a hard time buying that he's healthy enough to do that at his age with the injury he had. But then again, I mean, we thought the same thing about Steve Smith coming off the same injury. And then, I mean, he at least did enough with the volume to, pay off the draft pick you're taking him. So I think that's who they want to be the guy. I mean, we've seen that Crockett Gilmore's, he's okay, but he's pretty limited in what he does. He's pretty slow moving guy. Okay in the red zone, nothing spectacular. And I mean, Max Williams, I just don't see it anymore. It seems like the Ravens are not really, they're not really excited or pushing to get him out there to do anything.
Yeah, I mean, he's been legitimately injured though. Which feat of Steve Smith's this year was better? His coming back from that ACL at age 58, or his purchasing the majority stake in Draft Day Consultants?
Well, probably the Draft Day Consultants, just because I think we were more surprised that he owned Denny Carter on Twitter than we were that he came back from that injury. I was more shocked.
All of the records that he owned, yeah.
That's for sure.
Of course. All right. Well, a team that's tough to project in the Ravens to a team that might be the most tough to project. The easy answer when dealing with the Patriots is to throw your hands up in the air and avoid the situation. And that might even be sound advice, but there always is a surprise player or two each year to put up big numbers. We saw it with Garrett Blount last year. We saw it with Dion Lewis the year before. Malcolm Mitchell came out of relatively nowhere. I definitely drafted him on some dynasty teams last year. We've seen it 1,000 times. I mean, Chris Hogan even. Do you have any guys that could come out of nowhere this year, or is it just too crowded for anybody to have big success?
I think a guy that we continue to underrate. I don't want to say he's coming out of nowhere because we know him, and Scott Barrett has been pumping him for 2 years now. But I think James White is pretty undervalued in the sense that I think he's going to do a lot more than what people think. I think he's past Dion Lewis, sort of in the it's less about what you do and more about how Belichick values you, I feel like, on that team. And I think Belichick at this point seems to value James White a little more than Dion Lewis. I mean, we saw Dion Lewis returning kicks, and that's not a starting running back role in the Belichick offense. That's the special teams back. So I think Dion Lewis could be a surprise to not make the team. now that they have Burkhead, Gillislee, and James White, who projects to be the space back. If Dion Lewis,
do you think that might be better for his value if he doesn't make the team?
I think he could definitely land somewhere that could use him. I mean,
he was legitimately one of the best running backs in the league 2 years ago.
Oh yeah, and if he's healthy, I think he can play. But the question is whether or not the Patriots have him, in their plans. He's expensive for them this year. This is the year that he's the most expensive, and it's not going to cost them much to cut him. Not that he's like necessarily expensive, but this is the most expensive year of the contract. And they paid real money to Burkhead and Gillislee, so
which was surprising that they went after both of those guys.
Yeah, and it's
so they would save almost $13 million, really close to $13 million by cutting Dion Lewis, and would only have $200,000 in dead cap. I could definitely see that coming. Where would be like a good spot for him to land, do you think?
It would really, it's a good spot, but it would piss me off if he landed in on the Chargers. Somewhere that wants a back to catch passes who can also, carry the ball, which, obviously makes sense in New England, but I think he's the odd man out there. So
how about the Giants?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, all the Paul Perkins hype would be pretty upset about it. There are teams that need a little running back depth. That's for sure.
What are your thoughts on Paul Perkins?
I like him. I think he's okay, but I'm not super stoked about him. I didn't see so much to be, projecting him for 1,000 yards in New York or anything like that. But I think he's relatively cheap compared to other probable starters. So I think he's a value in the sense that he's most likely the starting running back, but I don't think he's someone who I would, I'm hoping to get me, 1,600 yards or something out of nowhere.
Could you see Dion Lewis maybe landing in Miami, or are you a Kenyon Drake fan?
Miami would make sense too. I'm not the Kenyon Drake guy.
Okay.
That didn't happen.
Players like this kind of land on a division rival for a few different reasons. I think you've convinced me. I didn't really look up his contract until now, and they would save over $1 million by cutting him. And you mentioned it. They like James White. They signed Burkhead. They signed Gillislee. That would make sense. Are they going to carry 4 running backs if no one gets injured?
Dion Lewis would really have to show up with special teams, I think. And yeah. I think Burkhead is going to outperform him in the special teams department.
Yeah, that's probably true. Is there anybody else of note on the running back side of them? I'm looking right now. No, just Brandon Bolden. Nobody really important.
And Bolden's he's like another one of their special teams guys, and Dion Lewis would probably have to beat him out. Bolden's not really a running back on the Patriots. He's more just a special teams player.
Right. I ever tell you the story about how I got a gun pulled out on me because I made a bet with somebody, and it had to do with LeGarrette Blount and who was the Jeff Demps. It was a LeGarrette Blount Jeff Demps bet. I was at somewhere in the mall. I made a bet with a cashier at a Lids. You know what Lids is, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So if anybody doesn't have Lids, I don't know how widespread they are. They're just a store that sells hats. So I wanted a new hat. I forget how we got into the discussion. The girl was a Patriots fan. I said something about LeGarrette Blount getting sent down they made the trade for Jeff Demps for LeGarrette Blount. And she said, no, that wasn't the trade. And I was right. And she wouldn't give me the hat that I bet her. And a customer pulled a gun out on me because he said I was being too argumentative.
Wow.
Told me, get the F out of the store, pointed a gun at me.
Dude, that's a
real story.
People are serious about their Patriots, man.
All right, what else do we got? I think I had Chicago Bears next. I didn't, but let's go to the Chicago Bears anyway. The Bears receivers are crowded, not in that they're all great, but really that they're all kind of good, but don't have any true standouts, despite a high first-round pick in Kevin White, a surprising season from Cameron Meredith. I didn't pose this question to you in the show prep, but do you remember who the last pass to catch for a touchdown for the Bears last year?
Oh man, no. It's a good question.
It was Cameron Meredith to Matt Barkley. Yes, in that order. Cameron Meredith threw a touchdown pass to Matt Barkley. That was the final touchdown for the season.
I remember that now.
Yeah. So back to the question on hand, like, who are you looking to stand out on this team? Are there any sleepers? I mean, really from the whole tight end position. I mean, from the receiver and tight end position, you can go all receivers there.
Yeah, I think an interesting battle to watch is going to be the Marcus Wheaton, Kendall Wright battle.
Yeah.
Because that slot job is I think the slot role in any offense is worthwhile, but in a Bears offense that may be moving to a young quarterback fairly quickly,
Did you see the news today? They want to give Glennon all 16 games this year.
Yeah, I mean, this is John Fox, though. I mean, do we believe a word that comes out of that guy's mouth?
No. Well, I wouldn't believe anybody if they said that they traded up to the second overall pick to draft a rookie quarterback and didn't want to start it. And maybe that is the plan, but that never works out. I mean, they tried it with Blake Bortles a couple years ago. It's never going to work out.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm sure it's the plan. And I think Glennon probably plays at least the first half of the season. But at some point, I think they let that happen. Whether it's for, 8 games or 2 games, it's going to happen at some point. So you also have Glennon, who's not anything special, but I would rather a rookie quarterback throwing to my slot guys than Glennon. Glennon does like to take the shots downfield. But I also think the interesting thing is going to be whether or not Kevin White is like alive by week 1. I mean, this guy just
he ages fast.
Yeah, and
he aged 2 years from being drafted until he took his first snap on the field. Well, actually, no, 3 years.
Yeah,
because he missed a year and he lied about his age, so that's another year.
Right, and we still don't even know how old the guy actually even is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm I think he's a guy who they want to be on the field, but at the same time, who knows? But I think it's, Cameron Meredith is the wide receiver 1 sort of by default, but it's definitely his targets, his role to lose. When you're a guy with no draft pedigree, there's never a long leash. So any one of those guys could, be a definite sleeper for, 100 targets or something. And 100 targets for the price you're paying for Marcus Wheaton, Kendall Wright, even 100 targets for Kevin White. They're all values because someone has to catch the ball other than Meredith.
Who would you prefer I know you're not like a dynasty guy, but we are trying to put a dynasty spin on all this. Who would you prefer in dynasty between Meredith and White?
It's an interesting question because Meredith is starting to get expensive. So,
well, let's just say their price is the same.
Right. And if their price is the same, I probably have to lean Meredith just because I've seen it. And I think Meredith is the safer option. But I think the ceiling for Kevin, like if you want to just swing for the fences with a guy, Kevin White is definitely the fence swing. I mean, he's good. We've seen him be good. We don't know if that still exists with all the injuries, but if you want the safe pick, who I think, is at least going to give you some volume return this year, it's got to be, I have to lean Meredith.
So I actually thought their price would be closer. I'm just looking at Dynasty League Football ADP, and Kevin White is going 31 picks after Cameron Meredith. Meredith is at 71, and Kevin White is at 102. Would it be safe to say you prefer White at his ADP?
Yeah, I think Meredith's getting pretty expensive, especially for dynasty leagues. I never want to pay a high price for a guy who is he was undrafted, right? Or late.
I believe he was undrafted.
Yeah, so he's not. I don't ever want to pay a high price for an undrafted guy in a dynasty league, just because we know that teams value where someone's picked. So he's
no
forever
Doug Baldwin, no Willie Snead.
I mean,
no
you
Tony
have those
Brown.
guys.
Yeah,
Those guys exist. But I mean, it took how
they
long
are
did it
people.
take everyone to trust Doug Baldwin?
Yeah. Well, I mean, even there's some people that still don't.
Right. I just mean more so in in the NFL.
Right.
I mean, the guy, people don't realize how old Baldwin is. I think people think that he's younger than he is, but we're looking at a guy that didn't really do much for the first 4 years of his career.
Do you think people? I mean, genuinely, I guess this is just a subjective question. Do you think people don't realize that he's going on 29?
I don't think people realize that he's been in Seattle as long as he's been. And not to say dynasty people, but I think you ask the average fan if they know that, Doug Baldwin's 29 years old, I think they would be surprised.
All right, well, last question for you. You know what? I wanted to ask you about, while we were on the Browns, what do you think about the tight end position? Do you think Adam Shaheen can do anything, or do you think he's just a project? Do you think, like, if anything, he's a long-term guy?
I think in general, rookie running backs are the long-term guys. I don't see why
tight ends.
Tight ends. Yeah, I don't see why they have much reason to go away from Zach Miller right now. And they also have Deion Sims. So I don't see Adam Shaheen really cutting into those guys, especially this year. So I don't foresee him playing meaningful snaps year one.
Were you surprised how high he went? I mean, what did he go, like 45th overall, I think?
Yeah. And I was surprised that they sort of just filled up their tight end depth chart. I don't know exactly what they're trying to do there. I mean, obviously John Fox wants to run the ball, so they'll probably be running plenty of 2 tight end sets. But I was surprised that, they have Miller, they go out, they get Sims, and they spend a high draft pick on a tight end after burning their first pick on a quarterback. I don't know. It was definitely interesting that they went after him. That's for sure.
I mean, he is huge. He's genuinely huge, and he dominated in college. I think he was a Division II, if I remember correctly. Where is Ashland? That has to be at least Division II, right? Ashland College.
Yeah, I can't remember.
I think Shaheen's a good dart throw. Ashland Community Tech. I doubt that it's a community college. I probably found the wrong one.
Yeah, Ashland University.
Okay, where's that?
Ashland University.
That's got to be a Division II.
I am trying
Ashland,
to find
Ohio.
Yeah.
I'm assuming their football program is at least Division II, but he dominated there. And Ashland has a long history of. I'm going to stop with that joke. Ashland has a long history of putting out quality NFL players. We all know that,
right?
All right, last question. We'll keep it in the tight ends. The Browns receiving core has playmakers. Corey Coleman, Kenny Britt. I don't think anybody's like quote unquote the guy. Who could step up and catch 80 balls for them this year? Are you buying into the Seth DeValve hype?
No, Kenny Britt's my guy, and I will keep touting Kenny Britt till I die. But I think Britt. He is a former first-round pick who, as in his breakout year before he went down, looked like the best wide receiver in the NFL for 3 games. He has slowly worked his way back in. Obviously, the offseason.
That's true. That's true. That was a long time ago, but that is true.
Yeah, and obviously the offseason stuff are the major concerns for him. But I think he has picked teams the last 2 years that are going to be the last few years that are going to be less trouble. I mean, you look at J.R. Smith when he went to the Cavaliers, and he cleaned up his act because he said there was actually nothing to do, so he couldn't go out and do anything. But I mean, Kenny Britt's only 28 years old. He's about the same age as Doug Baldwin. So it's not like, he's a nobody. And I don't think it's that far off to say that, he is probably better than Terrell Pryor right now, today, at least more polished. And Pryor put up numbers in Cleveland. And I'm not a big Corey Coleman fan because the only game that he's ever had success was against the Ravens' second cornerback, who was easily the worst corner in football last
year. He put
year.
up 2 touchdowns against him.
Yeah, and one of them he fell over. I mean, the guy I forget his name, but he was the guy you targeted every week with wide receivers was that cornerback. So, I think Kenny Britt's the guy, but again, I'm not sure we're going to find, a 150 target guy in Cleveland. So there's going to have to be a second person catching the ball.
David Njoku.
It's going to be Njoku or DeVal. I mean, it's got to be one or the other. They use the tight end.
I'm totally okay with investing in both of those guys. Totally okay with it.
Yeah.
They are both uber athletes. I mean, DeValve is objectively slow, and despite being white, he is an amazing athlete. And Njoku just breaks the scales. I mean, he has the ability to become the next big thing at tight end.
Right. And I mean, I never want to invest in a rookie tight end in redraft, but if there was a rookie in redraft that I'm investing in, it's Njoku. I mean, that's the only one that I would have interest in. Yeah,
I mean, and you're a redraft guy. This is a dynasty show. We're trying to put a dynasty spin on it, but we are looking. This topic specifically is for this year. I think I wrote an article like we called it like hot takes or something. It was a group effort. My hot take was that David Njoku would break Mike Ditka's 41-year rookie receiving record.
It's possible. I mean, eventually someone's going to have to do it, right? I mean,
it's possible as your second best quote tonight behind. I didn't know we were going to talk. I'm not prepared to talk about Geno Smith.
It's one of those things that's just like, it's. I don't want to say like it's not broken, so don't fix it. Like I hate that quote, but rookie tight ends just don't produce. So in a sense, it's a bad bet to bet on a rookie tight end to, have that kind of a production. But, every year there is a rookie tight end who is in the situation to be able to do something like that. And this year it's definitely Njoku. Obviously the offense is not what we would hope it would be, but he's in the position to get a ton of volume as a rookie tight end, which is rare.
I see you out here retweeting Kenny Britt stats while we're talking.
I had to. Scott tagged me in it. Kenny Britt propaganda is always going to be on my timeline.
All right, John. I want to thank you for coming on. I'm looking forward to checking out some of your preseason DFS stuff on the podcast. It definitely is something that helped me last year make some money in preseason DFS. If you guys play preseason DFS, I definitely recommend listening to that show, if not, all the time. I remember I gave you the advice to throw Mo Harris in some lineups last year. I don't think that turned out so well, but hopefully I will help you with a better recommendation this year. Anything else you want to talk about before we go? Anything else you want to advertise?
I'm just excited to be talking training camp, man. I'm ready for preseason. It's the opportunity for these dino guys that we like to actually be on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, John. Well, thank you for coming on. You can find John at John Proctor DFS. You can find me at Carl Safchik. As always, tweet the show at Dynasty One Podcast. Thank you for listening, everybody, and have a good week. Awesome show, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We got to get together and get a beer sometime. You're close to Baltimore, right?
I was. I'm out in Western Maryland now. I'm
oh wow.
I'm in Hagerstown.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Well, if you ever find yourself in the DC area, man, I'm like always in the city.
I get there occasionally. So next time I'm around, I'll have to hit you up.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, I'm in the ass crack of Maryland, man.
Right. What are you using, a Virginia address to play MFL 10s? I'm so pissed at them after you told me the situation.
My parents are like slowly working their way into moving to Florida, so they